A Monday morning, a brand new week, and nice to have you with us here on the Art Lewis Show. Later on, after the 10 o'clock news, we'll talk to folks from the Bay and Midland Community Foundations about their big giving day. And at 11 o'clock, we're going to learn about a sharpening service, Sharp Hand Ally Sharpening Service. All of that ahead, but we were expecting a guest this morning, but haven't called or shown up yet, so we'll have open phones. 989-752-6111 is the number to call. Haven't done it in a while. We've had a lot of guests. We're going to have a lot more, so this is an opportunity here to give us a call and see what's on your mind this morning. A couple of things happening, and I'm surprised it took this long, but the U.S. has begun guiding ships through the Straits of Hormuz. I would have thought they had done that a while ago. I know it had been talked about, providing escort service. It would seem to be the logical move. But we'll see how it goes. Whoops,
Gotta go.
Didn't mean to do that, but we did, and it's good to know about Godwin's. Anyway. 989-752-6111. And let me, this is my guest calling on the wrong phone. Let me check something out here. Hold on a second. Good morning. Got to call the other number. You know it? You have it? Okay, good. Give me a call. Bye-bye. All right. Little inside radio, folks. I'll tell you what, though, we do have one caller. I'll take that call, and we'll have our guest. This is Scott in Saginaw. Scott, good morning.
Hey, morning, Art. I won't take long then since your other guy is coming on. But I'd like to talk about Tim Walz real quick. I find it funny that 3 months ago he denied any fraud was going on in his state. Now all of a sudden he's out there championing it, saying he's leading the charge against it.
He's prosecuting them all.
Yeah.
And
then real quick, the Southern Poverty for Law Center funneling millions of dollars to the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
Well. All right,
buddy. We'll talk
I'll
to
leave
you.
it at that.
Thanks.
All
Yep.
right.
Bye-bye. All right, and now we say good morning to State Representative Amos O'Neill. Good morning, Amos.
Good morning, Art. How are you doing?
Well, we're doing well. How are you doing today?
Good. You threw me a curveball on the time the other day.
No, did we? I'm sorry.
It's all right. We
All
normally
right.
do 10.
Yeah,
It's
well,
all good.
it all works out.
It does.
Let me start out where I start out with most of you folks we talk to, because you're in the throes of trying to put together some kind of budget. How far along is the process, and when do you think it'll be done?
Well, last week we voted, the committee voted out their budgets to the Appropriations Committee, and we had our last meeting last week to move those budgets out for now. The work begins in terms of negotiating, in terms of, there were several cuts throughout the budget. And on both sides, colleagues have, attitudes and perspectives about, what should be funded, what should be additional increases or lack thereof. So this is when the sausage is made right now. Between now and the end of June, we should have a budget for you, and then put it in on that is my expectation.
How different was the Democrat proposal from the Republican proposal?
Well, whoever in charge, they set the agenda. And so, what happens when you have budgets like we have, you'll have the executive recommendations, you'll have and on our side, you'll have the House recommendations. And what happens, you go through each line item, and you'll see, if you get a chance to look at it, you'll see if the House, for example, for us, if the House committee agreed with the exec rec or disagreed, meaning they chose to do something different. And so that's out throughout the entire budget process, even on the Senate side. Now, when our budget goes to the Senate and they make their recommendation, they can agree with the executive rec, or not. or then they can agree with the recommendations of the House or not. And so I just reviewed a few budgets a couple of days ago, and you see that from the Senate. They just send theirs over to us. You see where there's some differences in their opinions about certain things. And so that's now, working, we call it the three-legged stool, the House, Senate, and the state budget office in terms of rectifying and getting to some resolution. There you have the Mackinac Conference importance. And at the Mackinac Conference that we all attend is where a lot of brokerages are made, conversations are had with different stakeholders who have stake and skin in the game. Priorities that we have for our local communities are also in this budget. And so it's a project we started earlier this year, unlike last year.
Yeah. I have a stupid question, though.
What's that?
Why do you have to wait for the Mackinac Conference? You guys are all in Lansing. Why can't you just sit down and have a budget?
Oh, no. I was referencing the Mackinac Conference. By the time we get to the Mackinac Conference, the budget should be baked.
Okay.
And most times in normal processes, it is. And so when you get to the Mackinac Conference, there are some things on the peripheral that you're trying to get back in or trying to negotiate to be considered. But by the time we get to Mackinac, the budget is, I would say, 90.5% done.
All right.
It should be.
So in talking to a couple of Republican members, they're telling me that the budget should come in around 80 rather than 84. Do you sense that it's going to be smaller than what was anticipated?
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of reductions in various parts of the budget from my colleagues' recommendation, and then that's where you have the negotiation. The Senate, and for example, the Senate and some of their responses have said they don't agree with the House recommendations, and they chose to submit additional funds or boilerplate language in contrary to what's been proposed. And so now that's where the back and forth comes in, and so we'll come in lower, I'm sure, because our budget pot is lower, basically, but they've made some major cuts, healthcare, is a major one, talk about, some of the services from the Department of Health and Human Services. That's one of our largest budget. Corrections, which is a $2 billion, general fund budget. There are major cuts there from some programs that were very impactful and that were working. And so me being the vice chair of that, I made my concerns known to the chair, and he's very receptive to that because he and I have worked. That's Representative Brad Slaw. He and I have worked together on this budget for the last 5 years. Whenever the table turns, I'm the chair. When the table turns, he's the chair. And so we know that budget's familiar. It's very familiar to both of us. So that's just an example. And when I raised those concerns at the committee hearing, he agreed with me, and we got some meetings scheduled when we get back to kind of talk about some of those line items, just particularly to that budget.
When do you find out the projections of income?
That's normally done early in the year. We have our consensus conferences. We usually have two of those when the House Fiscal will give us, the good, bad, and the up in terms of, are we above from last year, or are we below, or do we see a trend of reduction in, revenue coming in? So all those figures are shared with us early in the year at our consensus revenue conferences that we have to give us an idea of what we have to work with, and that's when we start.
Yeah. All right, hang on. I'm going to take a break. We're talking to State Representative Amos O'Neill, and we'll be back with the representative after these notes on the Art Lewis Show.
Club Keno Tripler time is back.
All right, we're back with you here on WSGW. We're talking to State Representative Amos O'Neill. We were talking about the budget, Amos. So we assume that's the focus right now in Lansing. But once the budget's done, what do you see as other leading issues that need to be addressed today?
Well, the budget. We always say this: the budget should be a moral document of our priorities for our constituents. I know a lot of folks are, dealing with, even if you can afford it, you go to the gas pump, it's $4.99, $5. Go to the grocery store, you're paying more for less. Just trying to keep your head above water. I think just focusing on not only after the budget, but even now, focusing on folks, everyday issues. And so, with the oil issues and the tariffs, and we just had a meeting this weekend with the premier from Ontario at Saginaw Valley, Premier Ford, and he was the commencement speaker for the Saginaw Valley graduates. And we had a lunch, and then we had a legislative roundtable. A lot of our business community members were there. Frankenmuth, Saginaw, and surrounding area businesses, and Premier Ford talked about the importance of our relationship with the U.S., particularly Michigan and Canada. Number one border partner. We, the trucks from different industries go across that bridge a dozen times before it gets to the finished product. And so, there's an organization called the Council of State Government, which is CSG, is a national organization that we all are a part of. So national provinces of Ontario and all those folks are involved. The point being, we have a global market that we're participating in, and our relationship, particularly with our number one border partner, Canada, is extremely important. And so, they're making major investments in infrastructure, and they have one of the largest oil reservoirs in the world. And so he talked about the energy crisis, what we can do together to prevent and reduce that cost that's being passed on to the consumers. And so those relationships are important, and I've been very honored to be a part of that, Canadian-U.S. Relations Committee for the past 5 years. And so we have to build those partnerships. And I think, you had Craig Gosselin there from the Spirit, and he spoke and talked about the important relationship. And, we had our chamber, we had our conventions and visitors director. You had the mayor from Frankenmuth, the mayor from Saginaw, key leaders. And so those are the kind of things we have to focus on even after the budget. What's in the best interest of the people? And I always say, for my area, the Great Lakes Bay region, what's good for the region is good for us all.
Yeah.
And so we have to always think big picture, or not just in a silo. And that meeting represented big picture yesterday. And so you have been pleased to see the people around the table that were engaged and talking about the benefits of our relationship.
So let me ask this, Amos. Talking about big pictures and things. We're in a gubernatorial election year. Several of the candidates are talking about, they're going to make efficiencies in government. They're going to get rid of the income tax. They're going to reduce property tax. What's the reality?
Well, when you start talking about taxes, that's, you look at Saginaw Township. How many times have they tried to go for a tax increase?
Well, tomorrow is the number 3.
Yeah, and so, we got to be smart about this. People are, as I just said, people are already strapped, whether you can afford some of these high costs or not. But that really, impedes their ability to save. It impedes the ability of a lot of companies to reinvest, even though some are doing it. But a lot of times, those companies, I was talking to a provider, Fullerton Tool. He was at the meeting, and he had some concerns with the minerals and some of the products that they need to have access to, and China has control of that. And so the cost to get those properties are extremely high because of what's going on. So even businesses like that and others who have the means, they hold on and they try to, make better decisions because of these these impediments that they're experiencing based in the business climate. So going back to taxes, that's another thing. If you have consumers who are not, using disposable income, then what happens? Small businesses close, which is the engine of our community. Various other organizations that depend on consumer traffic, foot traffic, it erodes. And so it's you talk about, it's not just a one decision. You have to think about all the repercussions or the ripple effect of a rock. You throw it in the water, and the ripple effects of one decision are long standing. You have to think those things through.
Well, that doesn't sound encouraging to get rid of the income tax, reduce property tax. Doesn't sound like we're going to really. I mean, that makes great slogans for elections. But what's the reality? I mean, can this state, are there enough efficiencies to be able to eliminate taxes? Those taxes.
Well, the reality is, Art, and this is just my perspective.
Yeah.
There are a lot of folks hurting. Urban, rural alike. Businesses are hurting. Even small business startups are stalled. And so, here we're working. For example, we're working with Nextra Automotive. This is in our region. We're trying to get another product in Plant 3. Saginaw Futures, Chamber, all those folks are involved, and so, everybody's scrapping. And so you think about the impact of just that facility and the spin-off jobs that are associated with that, and just add in, Dow Corning, Hemlock Semiconductor, all the, residual benefits of having those in our community, are extremely important. And so if you don't have a strong economy with, industry like we have, it affects so many other things around us. So, I'm a pragmatic kind of guy. I think, I went to Northwood University, which is one of the greater universities for business. And it gave me a perspective that I carry with me every day. It's global. Every decision you make, there's an impact that you don't see. You may see, there's some you don't see. So you have to be cautious and calculated when you make these major decisions like we're talking about now, because people are struggling every day right now, Art. And so it's hard to say. It's hard to say, is this good or bad? Because you talk to 10 different people, you'll get 10 different perspectives. Okay. So.
Well, I think in terms of the economy and what we're spending, I think most people would say it's bad right now.
Oh yeah, the global market again. Yep. Everything affects everything, and I just talked about Canada, but you think about all the other relationships that we have with, the business community we have. We have a great Commodore Council with the Chamber. Those guys, you got the Herb Spence, Dick Garbers, and the Sheens, all those guys. They're in the thick of it. You just talk to some of those guys. You go to hospitals. Yep. Even though we got great things going on right now, the Medical Diamond, the CMU Medical School, the Saginaw Valley, we've turned a corner in our region. We had a meeting last week with Delta College and Community Violence Intervention, Renee Johnson and prosecutors, talking to these students. Here we go, future leaders. And they were coming up with such pragmatic, futuristic thoughts about the future. It was amazing. And so, it's you've got to walk and chew gum and throw three balls up and keep them in the air at the same time.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hang on, I got to take a break, and we'll be back. We're talking to State Representative Amos O'Neill, and we will have more ahead right after these notes. Let me take a moment to talk about Quick Lane Freeland, where they are offering you a complimentary alignment check, because as you know, Michigan's well known for its potholes. Not something we want to be known for, but it's there whether we like it or not. And if you hit enough of those potholes, you're going to affect the alignment of your car, which is going to affect its drivability. So Quick Lane Freeland is offering you a complimentary alignment check. Now, if you want to know how serious alignment can be in your driving, listen to John from Quick Lane Freeland talk about it.
If your vehicle's wheels are aligned correctly, it will not pull to the left or to the right when driving. It also prevents improper tread wear, so your tires last longer. A wheel alignment should be checked often because normal steering wear and tear can cause your alignment to go out, in addition to potholes and railroad crossings. A correct alignment also reduces rolling resistance on your tires for better fuel mileage.
And of course, that means safer operation too. Quick Lane Freeland again offering you a complimentary alignment check. Just drive in and ask for it. While you're there, if you need tires, for example, remember that Quick Lane Freeland sells all of their new tires at just $5 over cost. Quick Lane Freeland, part of the McDonald Ford complex, and both of those folks, McDonald Ford, Quick Lane Freeland, stand ready to help you with all your automotive needs in 2026.
Give Local Midland is a great
Dream home at the Home Builders Association of Great Lakes Bay Region's Spring Parade of Homes. Tour stunning new builds across Midland, Saginaw, and Bay City and get inspired by the latest design trends from the area's top builders.
And we're back with you on the Art Lewis Show. We're talking to State Representative Amos O'Neill. Amos, let's talk about a couple of topics within the budget. Let's talk about education. We've seen increases in school funding, but as anyone knows, if they've been listening at all, we're ranked 44th in reading. It's not always about money, is it?
No, like you said, we've made those investments, and it's a big topic of discussion. You think about other states. I think what was used during the appropriations meeting hearing from my colleague, Mr. Kelly, who chairs education, was a comparison to Mississippi.
Yep.
Okay. And so, I think we got to get back to the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It sounds cliche, but, the third grade reading level is an indicator either on the positive side or the negative side. If you're good and efficient at third grade, then the chances of you succeeding are so much better. If you're at a deficit at the third grade reading, then the chances of you failing are maximized potentially. And so, we gotta start. We gotta support the families at home. Everything starts at home. That I know, and work with our parents, but also do a better job of educating just our kids on the basics. Basic reading, fundamentals, phonics, and so they can start early. We had a young lady. She was third grade? I believe she was. She came to speak before our Department of Natural Resources and Ag committee, talking about the fairs and the ag budget. And this young lady was in the third grade, and she was so articulate. We all were just pleasantly surprised. But that's an indicator right there. And we all said that your future is great. She was sitting at the podium, reading and talking to us as legislators about how important investing in affairs and, ag and, our county projects. And so, and I had a meeting this weekend with Kareem Bowen, with his program and some other individuals. We were talking about programs and reading. And I said, well, one indicator for corrections is, if your third grade reading levels are in the dungeon or are not good, then your matriculation differs from a person who is on the top end. Yeah. You act out in class when you can't read, and then you have behavior issues. Then you start your reputation or your history of being disruptive in class, not listening, all those things that we know, and then you go out in the neighborhood and you can't read and function. So you that same pattern continues. But we have to stop that by teaching and giving these kids the tools to be successful. We always talk about our pipeline. We were talking about our pipeline when I was meeting with Kareem. The pipeline for every industry is lagging, okay, skilled trades included.
Right.
And so if a kid can't read, they can't participate in any of those opportunities to matriculate. March was reading month. We've been reading all March and April, and sometime I got some meetings in May. But talking to those young kids about the importance of reading. And when you go to a classroom, when I go to a classroom, I see and I can talk about different topics of what I'm reading. And then, the ability for that young person to understand and expand on what you talk about gives me an indication this person has a good reading recovery knowledge base. And so it's just, we got to do better. It's my long answer is to the point of we got to do better. We can do better, and if we don't, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I heard a story the other day that we're losing more teachers than we're teaching. I think I heard that there were 6,000 individuals going to become teachers, but we're losing about 8,000. That doesn't compute very well.
No, it doesn't. And this area, education is one of our second largest employers.
Yeah.
We got Covenant and My Michigan and the health umbrella, but education's number 2, if I'm not mistaken, Art.
Yeah.
And so how can we have that status and our kids are not all of our kids. We have some great students. We know that. Those kids that are doing outstanding, we have that. But there is a large group of our kids who are not cutting the mustard. And those kids we'll have in other areas that we'll have to pay. The adage, you pay me now, you pay me later.
Yeah.
It's more costly when you pay later.
Yeah.
But the investment early, and we're investing. No one can say we're not investing. Democrat and Republican both. We are investing. Okay, they can't say that. We have made major investments, but the outcomes are not indicative of the investment we're making.
Right. Period.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
Hang on a sec. One more break, and then we'll finish up. We're talking to State Representative Amos O'Neill, and we will continue the conversation right after these notes.
My name is Kim Harris.
All right, we're back with you. One final segment with State Representative Amos O'Neill. Amos, let's spend just a couple of minutes here talking about the gubernatorial election. Not from the standpoint of which candidate you favor or don't favor, what have you. There is something unusual happening in this election, and that is that there is an independent who is actually garnering pretty strong support. In this day and age, people seem to be fed up with both sides, particularly the extremes of both sides. Is it time for an independent? And I'm speaking, of course, of Mayor Duggan, who has.
Yep. You're right. People are fed up with the political landscape in general. A lot of rhetoric. People want action. People want results. People want someone that's accessible. There's going to be, someone that can, you can hold the person accountable. What they say. Nobody's perfect, but if you mess up, you let it be known, and just be transparent. A lot of things that are happening now are self-gratifying, and particularly at the federal level. Unfortunately, that's my perspective there. A lot of things that are decided on are, connected to their personal gains and welfare, not the constituency of the United States. And so that's something. So going back to the state level, you need somebody that's going to be, universally amenable to both parties, meaning you got to be able to talk. You got to be able to work through stuff. And then you got to be a person that can pull things together, people as well, to get things over the finish line. You got to have somebody that's proven that they can do that. And so, people will let you know at the ballot box their opinions by their vote. And I say I always say this, the best term limit are our voters.
Amen.
If you're doing a great job, then they'll let you know that by their support. If you're doing a crummy job and not cutting the mustard, then they'll let you know as well by their lack of thereof. And so, so the proof's in the pudding. These are opportunities that everybody don't get a chance to serve in these capacities, state, Senate, congressional, and higher. And so when you're entrusted with such responsibility, then you have a lot. You have a lot to, give back and to the people, not for self, grandiose. For us as legislators, I think we're working under 2012 rates of pay. people talk about, you guys need to raise. Yeah, we do. But I think, it's just the opposite of people are fearful to do that. But we all work hard. I know I work hard. And I know a lot of my other colleagues work hard.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of our own personal money for stuff and just doing stuff through the districts and sponsoring stuff and, tickets to different events we pay for, $100 here, $50 here, $75 sometimes. We get opportunities to go and support. But we invest ourselves. Those that are committed, it's an investment.
Yep.
And, it's 24/7. People think you get breaks. You have to take a break. If you don't, you'll be running on a treadmill. But it's a commitment. It's a commitment. So whoever gets that role, they have to be committed to the people. And so, the independency status. I'm not sure. I haven't seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know Bernie Sanders is an independent, and but it's hard to be elected as an independent. But what I do know is some votes will be pulled from each side.
Yep.
And so what does that do for the whole landscape? You got to strategically look at a chessboard on this one.
Yeah.
Okay. If Duggan pulls so many percentage of both Democrat and Republicans, then it's going to hurt those that are the status of the R&D.
But then again, it may give him enough to win.
Yeah. Or it may help someone else to win.
You never know. That's right.
Yeah. So it's a chess game here. So
it always is.
It
always is. Well, Amos, look, I appreciate, as always, your time. And
my pleasure.
We'll chat again, my friend.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet.
You
Bye-bye
as well.
Now.
Bye.
State Representative Amos O'Neill, and we thank him for joining us this morning here on the Art Lewis Show. We'll take our last break here for this hour and then come back and tell you what's ahead next hour.
Ready to update your home and...
All right, that'll do it for the first hour of the Art Lewis Show. We're going to talk about giving. In the second hour, we have the presidents and CEO of the Bay and Midland Area Community Foundations. Tomorrow is a very special giving day, and there are matches. We'll find out all about that in just a little bit. But before we do that, we've got news coming up from CBS and, of course, the national report, and then the local report with Michael Perchip. I'm Art Lewis, and we will be back right after the news.
Broadcasting from the Storm